Anxiety can creep into our minds, bodies, and lives in the sneakiest of ways. From chronic bouts of anxious thoughts to full-blown panic attacks, anxiety can wreak havoc on our internal and external worlds. And although we often think that we should be able to conquer anxiety just by pushing it away or taking a prescription pill, I've found as a clinical psychologist that anxiety tends to get worse, often much worse, until we mindfully address the underlying issues. And when it comes to healing anxiety, research shows that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, yields top-notch results. Today, I'm joined by a leading CBT psychotherapist, educator, and author who offers expert advice on how to become the boss of your anxiety. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I divorced my husband 3 years ago and am finally dating. Here's some backstory. When I was married, I discovered that my husband was constantly lying to me and that he was also having serial affairs, one with a longtime ex of his. This triggered constant anxiety and a few panic attacks. I never had issues like this before. I thought the divorce would help me get back to normal, but if I get close to someone, I start having obsessive thoughts about them going back to an ex, cheating on me, that sort of thing. I feel crazy. What can I do to get back to who I was before all of this happened? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode may contain sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I am joined by a delightful guest, Dr. Joel Minden. Dr. Joel is a clinical psychologist. He's the director of the Chico Center for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and he's a lecturer in the Department of Psychology at California State University, Chico. Dr. Joel is also the author of Show Your Anxiety, Who's Boss, a 3-step CBT program to help you reduce anxious thoughts and worry. Well, Dr. Joel, welcome to the podcast. It's such a delight to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Carla. I appreciate your inviting me, and I'm looking forward to talking with you.
We are going to have quite a lot of, let's call it fun, with this very sad and serious real-life question. And the reason I'm saying fun is because it's not fun to be in a place of anxiety. Having been there, no, it doesn't feel good. But we can make it, I'm hoping, fun and light by giving good tips and tools to help this listener and all of our listeners who face anxiety or panic attacks. Give them some tools in an empowering, lighthearted sort of way. What do you think about that?
I agree with that. Empowering and lighthearted. I think with anxiety, it's a very scary emotion for a lot of folks, and it's hard to know what to do with it. And so often the things that we want to do, like try to get away from the feeling or control the feeling, backfire. And so I think a lot of the stuff that really helps in terms of anxiety management is counterintuitive. So empowering, I think it's important to do things that give you a sense of personal control. I can address this challenge. I can deal with difficult thoughts and feelings. I can handle this. And the lighthearted thing, I think, is really important as well. Sometimes it's helpful to change our relationship to anxiety. Maybe we can sort of relax our standards, allow ourselves to feel that way. Sometimes things get scary and difficult, and maybe we can see it for what it is, sometimes even have fun with it and laugh about it a little bit. So I think being really flexible in the way we understand anxiety and respond to it is so important.
It's interesting. Sometimes a guest is saying something and my heart goes, Ah, this feels good. This feels soothing. And that felt really, really good and soothing because it felt like a very friendly approach to anxiety. And before we get any deeper into the topic, can you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you you?
Good question, and a tough question to answer. I think one thing that makes me me is um, I've always seen myself professionally and in my personal life as someone who really likes to explore the middle ground between science and practice or applied work. So my hobbies, my professional work, I'm always kind of thinking about the scientific foundation for whatever it is I'm doing, but also how to live in the world, how to operate in an authentic way, in a practical way. So yeah, finding that middle ground between science and practice, I think, is one way to describe me and the way that I typically operate.
Okay, I'm getting a sense of an intellectual kind of crossed with a surfer vibe, but maybe not.
Something like that, except I
Something
don't
like that.
surf, but yeah.
You don't surf. What's your favorite form of exercise?
Lifting weights.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
There is a surfer-like quality to lifting weights because if you get into that flow state, right, that flow of I'm not a weightlifter. I mean, I can lift little weights, but I'm not a weightlifter. But there is something beautiful and very flow about doing weightlifting in the few times I've
Mhm.
done it.
Yeah, I think the repetitive nature of it is
Yes.
very calming, keeps you centered, grounded, focused.
Yes, and it is a form of exercise that actually does feel really empowering because you can feel your muscles working, you can see them working. So instant
Mhm.
gratification as well. All right. So now let's give our listeners, I don't ever like to assume that anyone listening understands what we're talking about when we're using technical terms that might be familiar to us, such as
Mhm.
CBT. So, could you give a brief description about CBT and why it's so effective?
Sure. Well, CBT, if you think about the name, cognitive behavioral therapy, we're looking at cognition, how people think and what they think, and behavior, what people do. And I guess left out of that acronym is the emotional element. And so in CBT, we're looking at the interplay of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And in my experience, especially with anxiety, but you could say this about almost any kind of difficult emotion, when people are struggling with their feelings, usually their go-to is they're sort of scrambling or looking for a way to stop the feeling or get a better handle on what's going on emotionally. And what I like about CBT is it's a really pragmatic way of sort of looking in different directions to understand the problem or to try to help people find a productive solution. And so sometimes that involves cognitive work, maybe looking at how people think about themselves or their relationships or the future. And sometimes, I say sometimes, I think we all fall into this trap. People get stuck in these biases. There's certain patterns of thinking that aren't very realistic, maybe overly negative, very biased ways of thinking, not reality based. And if you believe these things to be true, it can really create an obstacle. It can impact the development of difficult emotions. It can impact behavior. So when we get stuck in these thinking traps, or in CBT, we call them cognitive distortions, it's really easy to struggle emotionally and behaviorally. So we want to help people understand, how do you think? And would there be any value to modifying your perspective to be more realistic and useful? So that's the cognitive element of CBT. The behavioral element, in my opinion, I think this is the most important part of the work. Let's take anxiety. Typically, when people struggle with anxiety, they develop a pattern of behavior that involves a lot of avoidance. And it makes sense. If we're in a challenging situation or we think something bad is going to happen, of course, we're going to have that urge or that impulse to pull away from the potential threat or the bad thing. And that can feel good in the moment. We get that sort of reinforcing experience where anxiety declines maybe a little bit or temporarily, and it feels like, okay, maybe I'm on the right track by pulling away from things that are scary or difficult. But in the long run, that's really problematic because then we become dependent on this pattern of avoidance, and it's really hard to live a meaningful life if you just keep avoiding, avoiding, avoiding. So behaviorally, and especially with anxiety treatment, we want to focus on how can we help people move toward important challenges in their life. Even if things get scary, how do they work through the anxiety and still engage in activities or behaviors that bring fulfillment, meaning, and purpose, sense of accomplishment? How do we get people back into living behaviorally? Anyway, long story short, in CBT, we're focusing on primarily on the cognitive element, the behavioral element. And then I guess the final thing I want to say is, in terms of the emotional aspect, instead of working so hard to try to control emotions, maybe we shift the focus a little bit more to how do I understand my emotions and how do I respond to them? Because sometimes difficult emotions get in our way, and it's important to be flexible in the way we make sense of them and the things that we do with them. That's an overview of at least CBT the way I practice it.
It is a very thorough for this situation overview. And I really appreciate how you broke it down into understandable portions. And I'm going to throw something back to you so that maybe, and please, help me shift it if it needs some shifting so that our listeners can see how it's very practical. If somebody is afraid, they often say, I'm conflict avoidant. I'm afraid of having discussions with my partner or my boss or my parent or, my child. And so they don't have the discussion. They respond to the anxiety and they say, okay, well, I'm not going to have this discussion. I'm just going to close down. The issue doesn't go away. So they've avoided it. The anxiety signaled, stay away. Even sometimes the anxiety is lying to you. Sometimes if that person's not going to be horrible to you or harm you or be emotionally abusive, that anxiety is often lying to you based on an earlier life experience. But in the here and now, they think I'll just avoid it. And so they don't go through the discussion, the back and forth that would be needed to resolve the issue. And then it gets harder and harder to have conversations. So now the anxiety is controlling their ability to have honest or deep or meaningful conversations with other people. And so you would take that sort of simple situation and help that person understand, wait, yes, you're experiencing anxiety, your brain, your cognitions are telling you it's not safe, but we can shift this and make it realistic. Is this person safe? Will they listen to you? So now we're doing it in a realistic, and then have them practice it so that they stop avoiding something that could actually be empowering for them. How does that work as an example, just to kind of bring it down?
Great example. It's so relatable. I think most of us have to have difficult conversations with people, and it's a really hard thing to do. And one nuance that I want to bring up here, because I talk to folks about stuff like this a lot. Sometimes I'll hear, comments like, "I have to have this difficult conversation, and I'm really scared that it's going to lead to an argument," and then I'll hear, sort of a follow-up statement like, "I know that's irrational, but," and I guess my reaction to that is maybe it's not irrational, because maybe you're bringing up something that could be touchy, could be sensitive. Maybe the other person will have an issue with it. Maybe you don't handle it very well, and then it seems accusatory rather than productive. So instead of, being even more self-critical and judgy, like, I'm irrational in my thinking, I look at it more like there's a chance that things could really backfire here. You could try to have this conversation and things might really fall apart. And so that's where I try to move things more toward useful thinking. What could you do that would be helpful here? Maybe write down some talking points. Maybe you try to deliver the message in a really soft way. Maybe you try to do it in the moment, right? When a problem comes up, kind of acknowledging it and trying to work through it rather than saying to your partner or whomever, we've got a problem, let's sit down and talk about this, then it becomes a big event. So there may be a lot of strategies that people can use to think in very useful ways about how do I approach this really difficult conversation? And then the actionable part, how can I take that first step toward doing this in a way that's going to minimize the risk and increase the likelihood that things go well, that I'm effective?
I really appreciate that because so often, especially with the issue we're talking about, somebody who's afraid of having discussions or conflict, that the tips you offered just there help really ground the person. You first honor that, yeah, it can go bad. And sometimes when we really look at that honestly, okay, it could go bad. So let's prepare and see how well we can do, as you were saying, take some steps, maybe make some notes in advance, maybe practice in the bathroom mirror a few ways of bringing up the topic that sound kind and use I messages, And I've found that for me personally, if I'm talking with someone where there's some anxiety on their end as well, which I often will feel on my end, I'll just say, hey, I'm feeling really anxious about this, or I'm feeling a little unsettled about this, but I really believe we can have a productive conversation about this. And so sometimes just honoring our anxiety and saying it's there. We don't have to pretend it's not there. We just need to not go into fight or flight because it's there.
Yeah, I love that point. I'm so glad you brought that up. I think it's important to acknowledge to ourselves that I am anxious. This is hard. And then when we acknowledge that to someone else, that can be kind of empowering. I'm anxious and I'm still talking to you. And, sort of self-validating, but also maybe a little easier for the other person to sort of drop their defenses a little bit and go, okay, this is hard and it's a big step for you to bring this up. It must be important. Let's see if we can talk about this in a productive way, a respectful way. So I love that idea of just saying, hey, I'm anxious about this, important to bring up. Let's see what we can do here.
Absolutely. It makes it so much more human, so much more, hey, we're all imperfect. We all get anxiety. We all have issues. So let's just see if we can meet.
Yeah.
Just meet somewhere on this and talk. So,
Mhm.
all right. Thank you for all that background. Now, for our listeners' question, it's a really complicated one. It
Mhm.
sounds, as I kind of recap it in my mind, this individual's been divorced 3 years, now out dating, never suffered from anxiety or panic attacks, found out the husband was cheating with different people, now has recurring sort of obsessive, unwanted thoughts, intrusive thoughts maybe about that are related to, it seems, that they get triggered because the husband cheated on her, lied to her, and now when this individual is dating and getting close to someone, some sirens are going off saying, no, they might be cheating, they might be bad, they might be with an ex. All right, walk us through this little minefield, please.
There's so much to talk about here. So if I'm too focused on one thing or another, bring me back. But I guess the first thing I'm thinking here is, again, validating the concerns. Here's somebody who went through a situation where there was a problem of infidelity, and maybe they trusted their partner, they thought things were safe and okay, and then they found out things are not okay. So going into dating, new relationships, it makes sense that she would be aware of the possibility that maybe some people are not going to be trustworthy, and so this is going to cross her mind. It seems like a very normal thing to be concerned about. I would also, if I heard something like that, I would think, that's pretty adaptive, because imagine if you didn't think about this at all. You thought, okay, well, great, I'll just move on to the next person and I'll trust, whoever I'm with. That doesn't seem like a good move based on past experiences. And, who knows, right? When you're meeting someone new, you don't know a lot about them. So good to play it safe, or at least to some degree, in the early stages of dating. So I would, I think an important first step is to acknowledge that there's some value to thinking this way. And even if you don't buy into that, it's understandable that, that she would think this way. So I guess that's probably the first thing that I would focus on.
Can I pause here? That
Yeah.
was so sweet. That was so kind. And I'm going to repeat a few words you said, that when there's trust that was broken, that there was adaptive behavior as a result of infidelity, and that this behavior is understandable. So I'm hearing you say, this poor soul is not crazy. She's not broken. Her brain is a bit wired now to be aware for indicators that somebody might break her heart. They might betray her, they might be unfaithful. And so it's just, I often say to clients, your brain learns that a red berry is bad because, there was a person who got poisoned by the red berry. And so now it's saying, okay, it doesn't know the difference between a strawberry and a raspberry and this poisonous berries, but it's seeing red berries and it's saying, be really, really careful. And there is an adaptive, highly adaptive quality to that. So thank you for just giving us that dose of tender, loving care. All right, next step.
Well, I guess just one more thing I want to say about that is you were saying, adaptive behavior, and I think about cognition as behavior, right? The way that we think, it's private behavior. So this thinking, right, is sort of a private behavioral reaction. I may not be able to trust this person. So looking at that as a learned response, kind of an automatic thing that's going to happen based on past experiences, that might be pretty freeing for somebody who, sounds like in the example, she's being pretty tough on herself for thinking this way. It sounds like it's kind of an automatic thing. It's just happening, and maybe she can give herself a break for having these thoughts. And next, as I was saying earlier, figure out, what am I going to do about this? How do I move forward?
Thank you again. So it's a really beautiful way to look at when, as with most anxiety, right? Or repetitive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, there's a warning quality to them. And once we see that we're not broken, that the brain is just sometimes a little hyperactive, it's a little hypervigilant. Okay, so what's next?
Next, and maybe this is more build up than you're looking for, but you were touching on this. I think sometimes the anxiety we have, it's telling us something important, and sometimes it's like a false alarm. It's like that learned response. So maybe next I would focus on the appraisal of the thoughts and the anxiety, and by that I mean, here she is thinking a certain way and feeling anxious, and it sounds like she's looking at that as a problem. I shouldn't think this way, or maybe I'm going too far with this, or the anxiety is a problem. How do I get a handle on this? So focusing on being flexible in the way she understands these inner experiences, these thoughts and feelings. So I want to, if I were working with a client like this, I would probably work with her on making sense of this. Why is this happening? What does it mean to you? What does it indicate? Is the anxiety a threat? And I'm guessing that probably is part of the appraisal, because you mentioned panic attacks. Talk about that in a little bit. But is it a threat appraisal? I'm in danger because I'm thinking and feeling this way. Or is it possible that, as I've said a few times, that her mind's just going to go there and she's going to have these feelings because she's had these past experiences. And there are a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of uncertainty in dating. And it's just part of the deal as she moves forward in her life.
So could you say a little bit more, please, about the threat appraisal and why that threat appraisal is happening and how it benefits this individual or anyone in a similar type situation, and how it works against them?
Well, the threat appraisal might be really helpful, because if she's dating someone and they seem great, and right off the bat she just thinks this person's wonderful and I'm ready to go into a serious relationship with them, that's it's probably not a good move, right? Probably good to take things slow. If she starts thinking this way and feeling anxious, she thinks, be careful. Right. I don't want to find myself in a situation that I was in before, and I can't, completely eliminate the possibility of a bad outcome. But maybe these thoughts and feelings are telling me, be careful. You may be in trouble if you move too quickly here. So that kind of threat appraisal to me seems pretty helpful. Now, sometimes people can go too far with the threat appraisal. They might think, if I'm thinking and feeling this way, this person is not right for me, or I'm not ready for dating. There's no hope, and I better just give it up. And so, that's maybe taking the threat appraisal too seriously, and then again turning to that avoidance tactic to try to get away from difficult situations and the thoughts and feelings themselves.
So, in some cases, if this person, so break it down a little more, see if this is a good reflection back to you. If she's dating someone and they are maybe showing through looking at other people all the time or hiding texts, then her threat appraisal is really working for her. It's saying, hey, this
Mhm.
person, even though you're falling for them, look, there are some serious red flags.
Mhm.
So in that case, it's working for her. However, if she's dating someone who's really there, not showing any signs of being an unfaithful person or, having this mask of being one way when he's with her and another way, when she's not looking, if this person seems really honest and genuine after several dates or many dates, and she's still having these behaviors, then it's working against her.
Mhm.
Pretty
It-
basic.
yeah, although as an aside, if we think about anxiety disorders,
Mhm.
um, and this is my opinion. My opinion is all anxiety disorders have a common element, and that's an intolerance of uncertainty. So what you're saying, right, is if she's thinking, okay, things are going well, and I don't really see any evidence to suggest that things are dangerous or problematic here, maybe I shouldn't listen to this threat appraisal, or maybe it doesn't mean anything. But when somebody has an anxiety disorder, they want to know for sure, 100%. Am I safe? Is everything good? Is everything going to work out? And of course, we can't get that. We can never get that complete certainty. So somebody who's struggling with uncertainty, they may get tripped up even more in situations like this because it's not, is it a real threat or a false alarm? It's, I don't like uncertainty. And no matter what I experience or what happens here, I'm going to be considering the possibility that things might really fall apart. So that's, I guess, another dimension in terms of understanding anxiety and anxiety treatment, really paying attention to that uncertainty piece. Because for some people, they really struggle to figure out when am I in a situation where I just don't have enough information to know how to proceed? And when am I in a situation where the uncertainty is just doing a number on me and I don't know what to do with that?
As you're explaining it, I'm feeling so much compassion for this individual and for all individuals who, at some time or another, or maybe chronically, suffer from anxiety. And certainly, at the other end of the continuum, mild anxiety over here and then full on panic attacks over here. It
Hmm.
goes beyond uncomfortable to excruciating.
Hmm.
Sending, I've had clients end up in the emergency room, and that's how they come to find me because they think they're dying. And so I don't take my first book, Joy from Fear, all about anxiety, all about fear, all about how to, very non CBT. And I shouldn't say it's non-CBT, it's just my own approach, a Jungian sort of oriented approach to cognitive behavioral therapy. But so I am in accord with you, and I truly, truly love. So many people think cognitive behavioral therapy lacks empathy, lacks compassion, and you are bringing such blanket of warmth and gentleness and understanding. It's just so beautiful. And now you've written a
Thank you.
book on this topic. I imagine your book is infused with this same type of energy because it seems just part of who you are.
Thank you. Very nice of you to say. Yeah, there's that science and practice thing. I
Mhm.
tried to write the book so, really pragmatic and to the point, and a lot of applied info in there. But also, I think it's important to bring some warmth here. Really trying to understand the human experience. We all experience anxiety. It's a tough emotion. It's confusing. I think so many people just get down on themselves for feeling this way. Other people say, calm down, relax, get over it. So unhelpful. So I think it's, step one is go easy on yourself, be self-compassionate, understand that anxiety is tough for everybody. It may be tough for you in certain situations. And you don't need to be harder on yourself just because you're, struggling with an emotion you can't control. Be authentic, be validating, be supportive to yourself. That's going to create a nice platform to move forward with all these other strategies and tactics. And I guess another thing I want to say is in terms of theoretical approaches or models that we use. I like CBT. It's just really, for me, it's straightforward and practical. But I know sometimes people say it's manualized, it's overly structured, it's surface level. I hear this stuff all the time. But I think good therapy, different theoretical orientations and styles, we see a lot of overlap across the things that good psychologists do. And so yeah, I mean, I can see how people might have these perspectives if they've had certain experiences with CBT where it's, rigid and structured and not very warm. But I think it's important to really integrate different perspectives and approaches that, from different therapeutic modalities. But I would say, CBT includes these things anyway. But to bottom line, right, we want to use the evidence-based practices, but we also want to make sure that we always remember we're working with people. They're dealing with very real human struggles. And it's
Yes.
important to be empathic and supportive. And, this isn't stimulus response, right? Everything's solved. People are complicated and emotions are complicated, and we want to be empathic.
And you're smiling on my end because I'm thinking that maybe you'll just go off with your own, rebrand of CBT and call it cognitive empathic behavioral therapy or cognitive emotional behavioral therapy. Get that E in there that you were talking about
Mhm,
earlier. Okay, so your book, is Show Your Anxiety Who's Boss.
mhm.
And listeners, the link will be in the show notes. You'll be able to find all of the information there so you don't have to have a pen handy. But when you're looking at, let's move using that book as a platform. Let's look at, so now looking at the listener's question, now we understand, okay, you're doing this for a reason. You're uncertain. You want
Mhm,
certainty. And no matter who you're dating, there's going to be uncertainty. It could
mhm,
be, the world's most genuine human being, the most faithful human being, but there's uncertainty because that person's a human being and we are uncertain creatures. We do odd things sometimes. We have unique personalities. So, how can our listener move from the uncertainty that is controlling them? The uncertainty is already there. It's just controlling them. How
mhm,
can they take some steps so that they're not plagued? It sounds like they're so plagued by this. How
mhm.
how can they move forward?
Well, I guess the first thing I would want to do is just check in with this person and figure out what do you want to do here? And they might say, I don't know. But, for example, right, if I propose, well, why don't you have an honest conversation with this person that you're dating and explain your situation and how you're feeling like we considered earlier, that, that might be a good step. But maybe, she's thinking, well, first, maybe she's thinking, I don't know where this is going to go or how comfortable I feel in this relationship. And I'm not ready for that conversation. So I don't want to, try to direct someone toward something like that if they're not open to it. She might say, right now, I just really want to get a handle on these thoughts and feelings and the panic attacks, before I do anything. And so that's a mixed bag because that's going to lead to more attempts to control the feelings and potentially more avoidance. So, what I would suggest is sort of figure out behaviorally what are your goals here? What do you want to do? Do you want to continue dating? Do you want to have these conversations with people? Do you want to maybe a good starting point is I just want to get better at working through the anxiety. I go on these dates, I'm feeling anxious. I want to, just get more practice acknowledging privately to myself, this is going on. I'm working through it. I'm focused on the date. I'm giving it my best attempt. I'm going to be aware of what's going on. I'm not going to let this anxiety interfere with the things that I want to do. I'm going to treat it like background noise or a tolerable annoyance. And I'm going to figure out a way to proceed in a way that's really going to help me connect with someone and hopefully find a meaningful relationship.
Got it. Now, what if, and I don't believe her question specifically said this, but I'm doing an overlay on so many clients I've heard from with similar themes. If intrusive thoughts of what the ex did, what if those intrusive thoughts are also triggering this anxiety? They're running behind the scenes.
Mhm. And there we go back to the threat appraisal. So if you have the intrusive thought, you think this is serious business, you're going to get anxious and you may have the avoidance urge. On the other hand, if you have an intrusive thought and you think that's just a learned response or a weird thing that happens or background noise or whatever, something that, where the understanding is more objective, more neutral, maybe more self-compassionate, maybe even humorous, right? I mean, it probably doesn't feel very funny, right, to the person who's experiencing this, but maybe for some people, it's helpful to kind of laugh about this a little bit because as much as you want it to stop or go away, it probably won't. So maybe you can just see it for what it is and let this stuff unfold in the background without prioritizing it so much.
And I pause you right there because what you said about the thoughts probably not going away. For many people, especially people have come to me where they've been on anti-anxiety meds and now they're, wanting to be off them or whatever's happening. They're wanting to address these constant thoughts or panic attacks. And they think it will magically go away forever. They'll conquer the thought and it will be gone. And then when they do some work and it's still sneaking back in, they think they're broken. They think that they'll never get rid of, it's almost, I think of it similar to an ant infestation. That the ants come in, you can put out those little traps and they climb in and yeah, you get them all and you think, and then, a few days later, there's one walking on through and whatever you do with it, take it outdoors, whatever you do, squish it, I don't know. But the point is, that is my understanding and how I've seen anxiety work, that it does tend to trickle back in like ants. We don't 100% eradicate it because thoughts and unwanted thoughts, like ants, come in. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I love that ant example. I'm gonna use that if you don't mind at some point in
Please
the
do.
future. Um, I guess I would explain it because sometimes people they think, I don't want to go to therapy to just allow these thoughts to be there. I'm already doing that. But usually, right, they think they're just, tolerating this, but they're working so hard to try to get rid of these thoughts. And once we've learned this stuff, and we learn in two ways that I think are really important or relevant to this conversation. Once we learn this stuff, it's just going to be there. We can elicit it, certain stimuli and situations might trigger these thoughts again. I mean, take her example, right? She's worrying that somebody will cheat, or she's worrying, or she starts to think about her ex who cheated. If she's dating, right, these thoughts are probably going to come up here and there. They may come up a lot. Maybe sometimes they don't come up at all, but it's variable, it's unpredictable, it's uncertain. So maybe acknowledging that sometimes this stuff will be there. But then the other side of this is when you try to avoid the thoughts or when you try to control the thoughts, then it's kind of like your brain learns if you don't respond right to that noise, then make the noise louder. And if I make the noise louder, if I send more thoughts or the emotional distress that comes with it becomes more intense, eventually the person might learn, I get to a point where I can't take it anymore and I have to go right back to it and start wrestling with these thoughts and feelings. And then once again, they learn that this is important. When it's there, when it's intense, try harder, get more involved. And then they learn once again to commit to those responses when counterintuitively, probably the best course of action is see it for what it is, leave it alone. Don't engage in that tug of war with the brain. Just let go, let it be there, and then shift your attention back to life.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say, thought pops up. Okay, I can see, I'm being this listener for a minute. I can see the moment I found out my ex cheated on me. I'm reliving that moment. So instead of running away from it, saying I'm stupid for constantly thinking of that thought. I'm just going to look at the thought and go, oh my God, that's understandable. That was a
Mhm.
really scary and hurtful and life-changing moment. Huh. Okay. Okay. This makes sense that I'm feeling a little scared and anxious here. And then when we do
Exactly.
that, okay, thank you. So you're reminding me of the old study on the polar bear and the white rabbit study. Can you tell our
Mhm.
listeners just a little bit about that so they understand that we're not pulling this out of a hat?
Yeah, and I don't remember the specifics of that study, but the general idea is that telling people not to think something is probably going to increase the likelihood that they do think about it, because there's not a threat appraisal, but the importance of the thought is brought to the table by saying, "Don't think about this." We're kind of assigning some meaning to the thought. This is a bad thought. It shouldn't be there. It's a problem. Don't get involved in it. I want to make an important distinction. There's a big difference between having the thought, we don't control that, and engaging with the thought. So, what I try to encourage is create space for having the thought, because that's not up to you, right? Of course, people say, I wish I didn't have the thought in the first place. But since it's going to happen, let it happen. But then part two, don't fight it. Don't get more involved. Here's an example. People with social anxiety, often, to be socially effective, we want to think about our interaction with people, or the other person. We want to show interest. We want to be engaging. We want to have that reciprocity. But people with social anxiety, they become excessively self-focused. What should I say next? How am I doing? Do I look awkward? Am I nervous? Am I whatever? And that takes them away from what they really want to be doing. They're not going to be effective socially if they're so focused on themselves. So, same thing here. We want to help people understand that these private experiences, like intrusive thoughts, are going to happen, and there may be an emotional component. So that happens at the same time. And the trick is, here I am trying to go on a date or do other things, and I got to make a choice. Do I get more involved with my thoughts and feelings because I don't like them? Or do I take that step back, hands off, redirect back to what's more important, more meaningful in the moment, and just let that noise be there in the background? Now, one thing I do try to point out to clients, because they're thinking, so I just got to put up with this awful noise. Generally, when we practice things like this is called response prevention for people who are familiar with anxiety treatments, and talk about that more. But generally, when people don't engage with intrusive thoughts and difficult emotions in the way that I described, they learn three new things. One is anxiety declines on its own. We don't have to do anything about it. When your body's ready to calm down, it'll calm down. So if we just wait it out, the anxiety will decline. We don't have to rely on special tactics to control it. And as I keep saying, if we do that, it may backfire and the anxiety might spike. So that's one important opportunity for new learning. It generally declines. Number two, it's important to learn, very empowering to learn, that anxiety is tolerable. If I get anxious while I'm doing something important, maybe I can deal with that. Maybe with more experience, more practice, I can get to a point where I can feel anxious and still be effective at the same time. And I think when we have those experiences, it feels so good. It's so rewarding. So I try to promote that. Let yourself feel how you feel, but live your life, do the important thing at the same time. And then finally, when we don't engage with these unhelpful or irrelevant thoughts and feelings, we might learn for ourselves that I can deal with the uncertainty. I don't know for sure that I'm on the right track with what I'm doing with the feelings or the dating. There are a lot of unknowns. Maybe I can allow for that. Maybe it's okay to have a certain amount of uncertainty in my life, and I don't have to do more work to try to establish complete certainty. I'll never get there. Maybe I can let a certain amount of uncertainty be there in my life and get on with things.
Such a beautiful summary, and I am so appreciative of your wisdom, your expertise, your kindness, your compassion, your adorableness. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
This has just been amazing. Are there any other highlights you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I want to touch on the panic
Oh
element,
my goodness,
because
thank you.
here's somebody, not only are they getting anxious and makes complete sense, right, to those of us who are thinking about a scenario like this, but the panic attacks are so scary. And if somebody has for those listeners who are unfamiliar with panic, um, psychologists often describe it as an intense surge of fear. And so we might even see panic as qualitatively different from anxiety. I
Hmm.
think anxiety is anxiety. It just varies in intensity. But with a panic attack, it's like a fear response. It can be really intense. And sometimes people hyperventilate and their heart's beating really fast and they're sweating. It's scary. So I guess the final point I want to bring up here is if somebody's having a panic attack, usually what's going on is they're getting anxious about something, right? What if this person I'm dating cheats on me? And then they get anxious. And then they start to get anxious about the anxiety.
Hmm.
Why do I feel this way? And what's going to happen because of this anxiety? And so often, the thinking moves toward I'm going to lose my mind, or I'm going to have a heart attack, or I'm going to die. And that's terrifying. And then, of course, anxiety is going to spike even more because there's that threat appraisal. So I think with panic, I still have the same opinion. When you get down to it, it really is just a feeling. It's just an emotional experience, and we don't have to fear panic itself. I know that might be hard to believe for people who experience panic attacks because it is so scary. But I do think it's important conceptually to understand that panic is just anxiety. It's just a feeling. When I say just, I'm not trying to minimize the struggle of that, but understanding that I think is really valuable in those moments where things get so overwhelming and it feels like, okay, I'm going to lose control. So anxiety about anxiety, sometimes that helps people to think about panic in that way. Or what I would say in cognitive therapy, we would talk about catastrophizing or having catastrophic thoughts about anxiety itself. And that's when the anxiety spikes and may become panic. So what I would suggest for somebody who's having a panic attack, of course, there are, relaxation things that you can do, like slowing your breathing down, and that's valuable. But I think the most important thing is, once again, to acknowledge that I'm probably, moving toward a catastrophic place in my thinking about anxiety itself, causing the anxiety to spike. I'm having a panic attack. It's really scary, but same concept. I don't have to do anything about it. I can wait it out. I can let it unfold. And the sooner I can get back to doing ordinary things while this is happening, the better, because then I'll learn for myself that it really is just a feeling, and I'm more effective and functional than I thought. And that sense of empowerment that comes with that can be really rewarding.
Your empathy and compassion and genuineness just shine through. Carl Rogers would love you. Remember, if you were sharing therapy. Genuineness, empathy, unconditional positive regard. You've got it. Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Carla. And I want to say Carl Rogers is one of my heroes. And I thought about him earlier as we were talking because, think about anxiety, right? All these scary things that we
Mhm.
have to deal with in life. And I always remember, I love this. Rogers said, it's an awfully risky thing to live. To live your life, right? You have to take risks all the time. And that's scary. And acknowledging that, right? To be validating about that is so important.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you have kiddos or not, but he has that same sort of father-like, gentle, best friendish quality, which made him such a superstar in the realm of psychotherapy. Listeners, we're talking about Carl Rogers. He was amazing. Just so, and you have that energy that takes it away from any judgment, any, sort of airy-fairiness, and down to, wait a second. If we can just have this, what I describe as a gentle parent attitude toward the self, just that gentle, loving, empathic parent attitude toward the self is so healing. Oh my goodness, you
Thank you,
have been
Carla.
amazing. Thank you for joining us today. Where can our listeners find you and your book, which again, it will be in the show notes, but what would you like to say?
Well, they can find me through my website. It's CBT Chico, CBT like cognitive behavioral therapy, chico.com. And I have a private practice in Chico, California. And of course, my book, Share Your Anxiety, Who's Boss? You can buy that wherever you like to buy books. And I also have a blog on Psychology Today. Hasn't been updated in a while, but I've got some materials there. So those are the main places people can find me.
Perfect. And you're on Instagram too.
I'm on Instagram. Don't use it a lot, but
You're there.
there on
Okay.
occasion. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for sharing your time and energy and wisdom with us today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us, for sharing your time and your commitment to evolving in this very risky journey that we call, or often risky journey of life. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.